Welcome to the Beading with Coding tutorial. I'm Dawn Pratt, the owner of ASCII Newtow STEM, meaning Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. I've been a lover of science since I was 9 years old, which I remember in grade 4. And I'm also from Muscopeding First Nation. And who do we have here?
Hi, I'm Kristen Belcourt. I am from Cowessess First Nation. I also own a small business. It is called Hey May Creations and Supplies. And aside from that, I'm a student here at SIIT taking business.
And we're here to give you a beading and coding tutorial.
All right, so we're going to start off. I've threaded my needles here. I'm using gold eye needles, size 11. And I'm starting with this pattern here. The reason that I created this pattern is one petal for each of the 7 grandfather teachings. And that is the intention we'll be putting into this piece. So I'm going to start out in the center here, and in the center of this pattern I've chosen to use a yellow silver lined bead. These are size 10 check seed beads, and this color is number 1310. So I'm just going to come up in slightly off to the center here. And the stitch I'm using is a 2 needle flat stitch. So my main thread is going to be double threaded, and the thread that I use to tack down will be a single thread here. So I'm going to start out with 7 beads to make the center. Again, 7 beads to make a flower, 7 grandfather teachings. So we're just going to loop around and come back through the very first bead here to make a circle. Try and get it as much in the center as we can. And then we're going to go back through to hold this piece down. Don't mind my thread, it's getting a little tangled. All right, so then I'm going to take my single thread and I'm going to tack down every second bead. And this will just hold these beads in place while you work on the rest of your piece. One thing that you can use to avoid any knots would be beeswax. I like Thread Magic. It's a conditioner for your thread, and it helps them to prevent fraying and helps keep them strong over time. So to fill the center piece, I'm just going to add 1 more bead in the very middle just to close up that gap and even out our circle. And that's what the beginning of the circle will look like. So now we could take our double thread and start to bead another circle around it to finish the center of the flower. All right, so we're just going to get enough beads to go around here, and then we can start tacking down every second or third bead. I like to do every second when I'm doing circles like this. So when I'm closing up a circle or the end of a row of beads, I like to take my needle and go back through the first one again. You don't have to, you can just stop where the row stops, but I find that this helps to connect the row a lot more seamlessly, and then you can just Put your bead through the bottom there. And for now, we're done with the yellow, and we can put it away until we start filling in the petals. Okay, so now to fill in the petals, we're going to finish up the outline here, and we're going to use this navy blue, number 1036. I'm going to take my main thread and needle, my double, and I'm just going to start right here at the base, at the start of this petal here. And I'm going to try and tack down my beads as closely to the outline as I can. One bead too many. All right. So then I'm going to put my needle in here at the very end of the tip of the petal. So now just a firm grip on the thread, but not too tight and not too loose. This way your beads will line up the way that you're hoping for them to. I also like to use my finger as a guide. And we're going to take our single thread here and start tacking down every 2 or 3 needle or beads, depending what you prefer. So you can roll your beads if you like, and that might help them find a comfortable spot so that they'll follow along your outline there. And now I'm going to pull my needle up here right at the end where we left off and close off the petal. And we'll just put our needle back through the pelin at the end of the petal and tack these beads down as well. So now that our first petal is complete, we're going to repeat the same thing that we just did through the remaining 6 petals. All right, so I finished the outline here for all 7 petals. So now the next step that I would like to do is take off the paper. So now that I've removed all the staples, can just tear the paper away, and it should just tear away from where you've poked through with the needles. All right, so now we're going to start on filling in the petals, and I have a pattern that I created, and we'll just go through it here. So what we're going to do is come up just beside this outline here. I like to give myself about 1 millimeter between where I poke up the thread and the other row of needles, just to give the beads room so there's not any crowding. So I start out with 4 beads here, 4 of the blue, and I'm going to add on 2 silver lined. The bead number for these here is 1280. Then I'm going to add 2 of the yellow silver lined, 1310, 2 of the red, 1248, and then 2 of the blue, 1298, and incorporate the colors of the medicine wheel into the piece. So I have my 2 silver lined. Next is yellow, and then red, and then blue. And let's see here. So I need to put 1 bead between each color of silver lined. Oversight on my part, I put 2. And then we're going to close it off with 2 beads, 2 blue beads. And that should be enough for this row. Come through that end, and then I'm going to go back and tack each 3 beads down. So then I take my single thread again and start to tack down the beads to the pellin. All right, so now I'm going to go back and fill in the next row with all blue, and then I'll tack these down as well. All right, now that we're done with this row here, we're going to switch colors and add a lighter color of blue to the remaining center of the petal. So this shade of blue here is number 1010. I'm just going to add 1 bead here because it's kind of a little corner, tight little corner, and I don't want there to be any gaps. And we'll just go back and do the same thing until this petal is closed. Okay, so then I'm just going to close it up here with 1 more blue bead. I'm going to try and find a small one. Okay, and so that is the first petal. My bead just went sideways there. So that is the first petal there. So now we're going to repeat the same pattern throughout the remaining 6 petals. So this is all the completed petals here, and we're just going to go ahead and outline it with white, number 1022, and then we'll cut it out and put it on the keychain. So when I'm beading this here, since it is the final row and it is the outline, I just want to make sure that I'm taking the needle here and kind of burying it below the beads so that when we go to cut this piece out from the pellin, we're not going to cut thread. So you just kind of get it down under there between the beads. And we'll do that all the way around the entire design. So I'm just going to outline each petal individually until all 7 are complete. So I'm almost done with the white outline going around the piece. After I'm done with that, we're just going to cut it out as close to the white outline as we can without cutting any of the thread. And then we're going to glue it on to this piece of moose hide here to complete the keychain. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and tie some knots with my thread so they don't come loose over time. You can dab glue on it if you'd like, or you can tie a bunch of knots. And I'm gonna start cutting very carefully. If you do happen to cut a thread, it is a good idea to dab some glue on the tip of that thread there so that it doesn't continue to, so you don't lose any beads. I'm just gonna grab my glue. All right, so now that I've cut out the piece here, I've gotten some moose hide ready for the keychain. So I'm just gonna put the key ring on directly to the center there. And what I'm gonna do is put some glue on the back of this, glue it down, but I'm also gonna sew it down so that even if the glue comes loose, the beadwork stays in place. So I'm just gonna center it the way that I like. There we go. I'm just gonna put some small amounts. So it's on now, and I'm just gonna sew it right into the moose hide. And I'm gonna sew each tip down. All right, so I lost my key ring here. I'm just gonna put it back on. And then now that all of the petals have been sewn and glued down, we can apply some glue to the center here and start sewing it together. So we'll try and get it as evenly circular as we can. If there are any pieces that don't line up, you can definitely trim them off. All right, now we can go ahead and start the peyote stitch to close the keyring. All right, so I've got a double thread needle here. And what I'm gonna do is take, one blue, two white beads, and then one more blue. And I'm gonna go about maybe 4 millimeters and go through both sides of the moose hide. Just like that. And then I'm gonna come back around and go back up through that second blue thread and just make sure that the tension is good and it's not too loose. And then since we have our starting blue bead just there, we don't need another. So we'll just go right onto the 2 white again, and then the 1 blue bead that will come back up through. Again, maybe about 4 millimeters. All right. And you're gonna do this all the way around until it's all closed.
So the 7 petals you mentioned were the 7 grandfather teachings?
Right.
And I remember you talking about the center of the petal, the flower was representative of something, and you used a certain number of beads.
You can use 6 beads to make a flower. I find that 7 beads makes a nicer, more uniform flower.
You mean the center of the flower?
Just the flower itself, and then the center is just a different bead.
Oh, you mean the circle?
The circle of the flower,
around the center.
Yep. So I use 7 beads for the outside of a flower for all the petals, and that can also be related to the 7 grandfather teachings. So it's all about the intention that you put into your piece.
And you use how many in the middle?
I don't remember how many exactly. The very center there, and then 7 around it, and then however many it took to close up.
And why did you pick this particular flower?
I chose this flower because of the SIIT color, the blue, and then also the lighter SIIT blue, or the darker SIIT blue, sorry. Okay, so then it's all done, and you can go ahead and tie a knot in your thread. I like to tie a few knots.
And what kind of knot do you do? Because mathematically speaking, there's different types of knots in math.
So I like to make a loop like so, and then just kind of pull my thread through it a few times, kind of like you're tying a fishing lure. And then it's pretty good, pretty tight knot.
So I can keep it pretty tight?
Oh yeah. So this will be your finished piece.
Well, Chanel, she talked about numbers, specific type, especially 7. She talked about the number 7 a lot in her beading. She
I
talked
usually
about
try to incorporate 7s as much as I can.
and anything you bead.
In lots of, like, yeah, especially like because I do a lot of flowers and I always make sure that they have 7 petals. You've seen my flowers.
And you talked about the 2 different stitching you use to put this together. With coding, there's different coding languages very similar to also the stitching of beading. The different stitches also is a way similar to coding. You can get more in depth with talking about the similarities between coding and beading. But also she talked about the numbers she uses in her beading patterns. Like she uses the number 7 a lot throughout her beading materials or her beading.
My pieces.
Her pieces.
When I make flowers, I make sure they always have 7 petals. I try to put flowers in a lot of my pieces.
And symmetry. You use a lot of symmetry, but it's also, once you do one petal, it's also repetitive, right?
Yeah.
Like
So
code
for
would
each
be
petal, since they're
repetitive.
symmetrical, most of them, depending on the size of the beads, most of them took the same amount of beads to make each petal.
And so pretty much that's how coding and beading would be very similar. There's a couple similarities with the
Yeah,
numbers, the
with the pattern
patterns,
of numbers, yeah.
the different types of stitching, and just putting everything together, much like how you take a code and put it together and you end up with a program, and here you end up with a beading piece.
Yeah.
So the thinking patterns is more or less what I'm talking about, and when you're talking about beading and coding is there's this very similar way of thinking about code
And planning.
and planning and making sure you're following through with, because you're being repetitive, so you have to make sure that every petal on here is identical.
Yeah. As identical as I can make it. You can break a bead and go back through and replace it, but sometimes you can really notice that there's the mistake there that you fixed. But
Thank you for joining us today on our beading and coding tutorial. And I'm Dawn Pratt from Asking STEM.
And I'm Kristen Belcourt of Hey May Creations and Supplies.